All right, so we're going live. All right, so that seems to work. And let's try the this one. Is it Facebook? Live video. Sorry, folks, just trying to figure this out. I believe, yeah, I think we are live. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we welcome our good friend, Joe Ide, back. I want to say back to the program, but back to the Poison Pen, albeit in virtual form, to talk about his brand new book, The Goodbye Coast. And Joe, what a beautiful book, by the way.
It is.
Joe kindly signed a batch of books for us, and I'm flying solo tonight, so I'll try to put a link in the comments field, but you know how to get in touch with us. It's just poisonpen.com, and we still have some signed copies left, although not many. So if you want one, you better jump on it. Anyway, welcome, Joe. It's great to see you, as always.
Thank you very much. I'm always happy to come back to Poison Pen.
Yeah.
You guys were my first event back with IQ.
Was it
my very first? Yes. And I shared the stage with John Sanford.
Up and coming young writer, John Sanford. Yeah.
So I was intimidated all the way around.
Well,
and he's such a character. So
yeah, here is that first book that put you on the map. Yeah, he's a total character. I love John. Just dry, laconic, such a smart guy. I love talking to him. But yeah, I mean, there's so much for us to get into. We were talking a little bit about some noir LA history before we went live here, and talking a little bit, of course, about Raymond Chandler. How couldn't we? I mean, tell me a little bit about. I'm so fascinated with this whole project. I mean, it's a very, very, and I got my hats are off to you. It's a very gutsy thing to do. Anytime this is a reimagined Philip Marlowe for a new era. As I read the book, I think as a lot of people, if you're expecting Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe,
yes,
yeah, this is Raymond Chandler for a new Los Angeles. But if you look deeply, all the themes are there, and I'm just I'm fascinated on how you approached this. How you got the gig in the first place, and let's just dive into it.
How I got the job. The agent for the Raymond Chandler estate was in the airport, and he liked the cover of IQ. That's why he picked it up. That's why he read it on the plane, and he took it to the board of directors of the estate. And they decided to give me a shot. I was very excited, and of course, at the prospect. But it was also very daunting, having the opportunity to disappoint thousands and thousands of Raymond Chandler fans.
Yeah.
The task had several parts, and one was I couldn't just transplant Humphrey Bogart to the 2021.
Sure.
So I took the original Marlowe's attitudes, personality, cynicism, and I moved that forward to the new character. The other consideration was the character had to be entertaining to those readers who never heard of Philip Marlowe.
Sure.
And so he had to stand alone, separate from the original Marlowe. I mean, in the end, I had to write a good detective. that turned out to be the job. And the writing itself, I made a decision very early that I can't write first person. I don't know how to do that. I mean, that's a whole skill set in and of itself, and I don't know how to make one character carry the whole book. I write a lot of characters, I write a lot of subplotting. And so I decided to just write the way I write. I mean, I really didn't have any choice. I can only write the way I write. So that was out of the way. And then And then it was just writing. It was just writing the way I write. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I never really considered being a novelist until I was in my 40s. And, you know, it just never came up. And I'd never written any fiction up to that point until well, I had a graduate degree. And the first job I had was teaching school, but I found out I didn't like kids. And then there was a series of jobs, business consultant and college lecturer and all kinds of things. I was always restless. I always didn't want to be there. And I was just not fit for the workforce. And I decided to write screenplays, and it took me a while, but I managed to be a screenwriter. And I worked a fair bit. I did projects for most of the majors. But nothing I wrote ever got made. And that's how you keep score. So after a while, people started going, well, why aren't Joe's projects getting made? You know, is it him? Is he hard to work with? You know, is he jinxed? I mean, they really do think like that. So I quit, and nobody noticed, but I quit. And I moped around for a long time. And then I decided I had to do something to make a living, and writing was the only thing I knew how to do. So I wrote IQ, and it took me 3 years. I thought that being a professional writer, I had the writing part down, but you know, it's a whole different skill set. You know, it's like, because you can play tennis does not make you play golf. So it took me a long time just to learn how to write prose, just to learn how to write clean, decent prose. That took a year, and I'm writing at the same time, and then it took me 2 years to finish it. So that amazingly sold, and I set off on these to write IQ books, and then this comes along, which is quite stunning. It really is. You know, I marvel at it every day, and I'm grateful every day. There are so many aspiring writers and writers who want to be in my position, and here I am. It's astonishing. It really is, Patrick.
Yeah, no. It's been wonderful to watch. I mean, and you know, the Los Angeles crime novel. I mean,
Yes.
from my point of view, I mean, the IQ novels are a major modern contribution to that body of literature. You know, and I know that the publisher, and perhaps yourself as well, you know, referred to it or marketed as, you know, Sherlock Holmes in the Hood, which I think is a great description. But IQ reminds me a lot of Chandler. You know,
really?
a lot, in some ways, yeah, in some ways. You know, in all good ways. I see the Holmes thing, but it's hard to write about Los Angeles without evoking, you know,
it's true.
The ghost of Chandler. Now, we were talking a little bit about Chandler himself. Did you go through? You said you were reading the Frank McShane biography, which I have a copy of right here. I was also doing a little show and tell to Joe about this copy of the Long Goodbye, my favorite of Chandler's novels.
Mine too.
Yeah,
I've read a fair bit about Chandler, and he was born in Chicago. He went to UK as a child and got a pretty good education in English schools. He moved back to the US, to Chicago, and started working. He took courses in being an accountant and a bookkeeper, and that was a stock and trade for years. And he got fired from a job as a vice president of an oil company, and he was doing really well, except he was drinking too much, so they fired him.
right.
He always claimed it was politics, but it was his drinking. And from there, he needed to make a living. He was really poor. I mean, he was really struggling. His Chandler and his wife, Sissy, they had to move from relative to relative to friend and just crash, you know. And he decided that he would try to write short stories for pulp fiction magazines.
Yeah.
And he wrote one for
Black Mask.
I forget the name of the magazine, but he sold it for $150, which was a lot of money. And then he kept writing them. And he was very successful writing stories. And then I think in '39, he wrote his first novel. And it's like that. He just never looked back. He was, you know, and he just struggled with his alcoholism. But he moved pretty much all over California, ended up in La Jolla, and was living a pretty good life, except for his personal problems.
Right, right.
Yeah. I think one of the things that screenwriting taught me was how to describe someone briefly. You know, to pick out a characteristic and use the reaction of another character to show impact. And this is our first impression of Marlowe. You know, he's meeting his client, Kendra James, movie star, notorious diva. Marlowe's looking off, distracted, as if he was bored and thinking about something else other than the A-list celebrity sitting right in front of him. Disrespectful, Kendra thought. He reminded her a little of Steve McQueen if Steve McQueen was a rude, insolent asshole. Marlowe met her gaze, and she was instantly uncomfortable. His eyes were the kind that took in everything, but gave nothing away. The kind that didn't notice, but inhaled. The kind that were neutral, but assessed, gleaned, and adjudicated. That was the first thing I wrote about him, just the eyes. And from there, I kind of built it out from there. So what is he wearing? And what does he drive? And how does he talk? And it's like taking pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and fitting them in until you see the whole, which didn't happen to me until, I don't know, page 60 or so. And I started to see him as a person. Yeah. The story, I won't go into it, but Kendra hires Marlowe to find her runaway stepdaughter, Cody, who's just spoiled kid. She's just an awful kid. She's, she dresses in all black. She goes clubbing every weekend, completely self-involved. I mean, entirely self-involved.
Entitled as hell and obnoxious and the whole deal.
I like to let characters like that define themselves, and there are times when you can sort of slip in a comment of your own. And here Marlowe and Cody are talking. You want to be famous? Marlowe said. Famous for what, Cody? Acting, art, fashion? No, there's too many dues to pay. Internships, school, all that bullshit. Got to take years and it might not even happen. Maybe I'll be like the Kardashians. They have no talent, but they're celebs. They have big companies. They give each other Lamborghinis as birthday presents. When Kanye asked him to marry him, he rented out the AT&T Stadium. He hired a 50-piece orchestra and put the proposal on the Jumbotron. How cool is that? The Kardashians have ruined America, Marlowe thought. It seemed as if there was a whole generation of deluded teenagers with big ambitions and no way to achieve them. That's Cody. In a nutshell, that's her. Yeah. So, her stepmother, Kendra, is a piece of work. She hires Marlowe to find Cody, who's out there in Hollywood somewhere. And she's also, I define her chiefly by her dialogue, chiefly by the things she says. Kendra's throwing a party for her celebrity friends. Marlowe wants to come and bring 2 guests. And Kendra, the diva, is outraged that she was even asked. And this is her response. You're a tapeworm, Marlowe. You're eating my guts out. Fine, you win. But if you want your so-called guests to attend my party, I have conditions. Yes? Don't bring some yokels here from Donkeyville, Oklahoma, playing their harmonicas and scratching their ass cracks, and they are not to talk about boll weevil season or how they eat roosters for breakfast, or that they only wear shoes at funerals and hay rides. And remember, I don't like germs. If your hayseeds bring some mutant strain of hoof and mouth into my beautiful home, you won't get a job finding dead flies on a windowsill. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about Kendra. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Kendra and what am I trying to say? LA in general, in Chandler's time and now, It's all about reinvention, and it's all about the facade in some ways, especially when you get into Hollywood.
Yes.
This very high stakes, glittery facade, this
Mhm.
dream world, and of course, in the early days of Hollywood, the Chandler and Kane and that classic era,
Right.
thousands upon thousands of young, pretty girls from Frog Balls, Oklahoma, or whatever, arriving at Hollywood and Vine with their suitcase at the bus station,
Yes.
thus providing material for, all these wonderful crime writers.
It's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
So it's all
Yep.
about the dream, and it's such a endlessly fascinating city.
It is. It has everything that a writer would want. Every situation, every character, every ethnicity is right here.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing about writing about LA is whatever situation or person or character you want, he's here, she's here. No.
Right. There's always something, like with Long Goodbye, for instance. There was always an element of surreality in Chandler,
Yes.
because he's capturing the weirdness of California, the
Yes.
weirdness of Los Angeles, and that peeks in. And you do a wonderful job in your novels and in here of showing us that as well.
It was part of the job. The Marlowe novels were so LA. LA was such a character in the books.
Yeah.
I had to try and do that myself. So there are a lot of locations in the book.
Yeah.
The story moves us around LA and different locations and different institutions. And, I know that's part of the job, but at the same time, you don't want to force it. You want to go somewhere just to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's these things I do on the fly, Patrick. I don't outline. I don't really know where I'm going until I get there. I don't know what I'm going to write until 2 seconds before I write it. It's just a question of having an objective. Like, what am I trying to say here? What do I want to accomplish? And then I just write. And Marlowe was a dream. Marlowe was great to write. It was fun, not in a sort of Disneyland way, but in a writer's fun. It's like I'm a really short, unathletic Tom Brady. And I call the play, and I can see the whole field. I know what all the other players are doing, and I can hit my receiver on the fly. It's a very gratifying thing to do. I mean, if you're a writer. So I truly had fun with it. I did.
Well, and there's so much going on in this new reimagining of Marlowe. It's a book arguably about fathers and sons. Father and son relationship plays a major role in this book. The basic setup, as I understood it, and I don't want to paraphrase it or whatever, but his father, Emmett Chandler, was sort of a legendary cop on LAPD, and he has a little drinky issue too.
He does.
But his beloved wife, Addie
died.
Addie, yeah. And this isn't a spoiler, folks. It's right at the beginning, towards the beginning of the book. We learn that she's passed, and he's kind of gone into his own little alcoholic tailspin.
Yes.
But
and Emmett and Marlowe have issues. They have deep-seated, long-standing issues between them, and it's one of the things that myself and a lot of writers do is to try to have underlying issues and hidden agendas under almost everything we write. If Emmett is talking and to Marlowe, if I don't have that underneath, then they're just talking. They're just talking. And I try to hold on to that tension. It's not possible to hold on to it in every scene, but I try, because it's why a lot of books lag, is because the writer let go of the tension. And so that's just another part of my job, is to have those undercurrents. And Emmett Here's Marlowe's take on his father. Emmett reminded him of Harry Dean Stanton, all scrawny and disjointed, like his skeleton had been assembled from leftover parts and not enough screws. Emmett was in his boxer shorts, scowling, his legs like hairy chicken bones. For no apparent reason, he was wearing a hideous Hawaiian shirt. It looked like a family of parrots were trying to murder each other. That's Emmett. And what I'm doing with all these characters is I'm looking down the road and I'm thinking, I have to come up with characters who are going to be in conflict, who are going to be in each other's faces all the time. Because if I don't have that, I mean, it's that adage about conflict is story, story is conflict. And so I try to make each pairing of characters, whether it's Marlowe and Cody or Marlowe and Kendra or Kendra and Cody, I want all of them to be odd couples. I want all of them to have friction. And it's the way I find the story. Marlowe goes to see Kendra. Immediately there's a clash. She wants her stepdaughter, but then Marlowe senses that's not all there is to it. Something else is afoot here. And so I'm building characters and I'm building the story like that. The characters are taking the lead. And as I put the characters together, I start to see more of the story, at least where it could go. Yeah. Okay. It's just, yeah, I'm all about character.
Well, it's great how early on, we just learned the basics about how, Philip, he just had the attitude, from the very beginning that he was not gonna do well as a formal policeman. He went to the academy. His own parents said, man, you're not gonna last 4 weeks. And sure enough, 3 weeks, they booted his ass out.
Yes.
And so, one of the true weird little bits of Californiana that I think Chandler would have been proud of is your character, Basilio Ignacia.
Yes.
Isn't that his name? Who is this old school, well, you tell us about him. And he loves Panda Express, which I thought was a great detail.
Basilio was a colleague of Emmett way back when. And Marlowe got kicked out of the academy for, having sex in a forensics van with, one of the crime scene analysts. And so he doesn't have any choice really if he wants to be in this trade, but to be a PI, except the requirements require an internship that's like 2,000 hours. So so Emmett hooks him up with Basilio. And Basilio does not make a good impression. They meet in Panda Express on Cahuenga, and Basilio loves the place. It's terrible food, but Basilio loves the place. And he explains to Marlowe what the job is. And his version is very unglamorous.
Right.
And Marlowe's kind of, well, aren't there any bad guys? And Basilio says, oh, yes, there are bad guys. Every form of evil is right outside that door. And Basilio has a pretty wise overview of the profession. First, you think he's a buffoon, there he is, eating orange chicken, and he's got orange stuff on his T-shirt, and he's eating beef and broccoli too, but he pushes the broccoli aside because it's only there to flavor the meat.
Right.
He's, you kind of go, who is this guy? But he turns out to be a very wise, kind man, and
pretty key to the book, really.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To have him, to have him start Marlowe off,
right,
and to have that wide view. Yes, he was very important. He was.
And so, I mean, the reader, as I say, is automatically going in with this idea of looking for parallels, especially one that's a real Chandler person. And, part of the thing that was so one of Chandler's kind of signature stylistic flourishes was his ability to have a character, it was usually some dame, walk into a room and make one very short observation that told you everything you needed to know about the whole thing. You know, he was just so good at that. And I
Learn
found
to call.
I found some really great ones in here that you did too, which I thought were probably might have been a nod to that kind of thing.
I tried to nod to Chandler in as many ways as I could.
Yeah.
Like Marlowe lives on in this derelict warehouse on Hollywood and Ibar, and
Yeah.
that's where Marlowe's office was. The original Marlowe's office was. It's things like that. I was acutely aware of that, of the Chandler fans, you know, and I really wanted them to have a way to relate to this new Marlowe. You know, part of Marlowe was his cynicism. That was a big part of his character. You know, his very dim view of mankind, and it's a tricky thing to write because it gets really ponderous if the guy just pontificates.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to communicate the cynicism, but do it in a way that's part of Marlowe's life, and to show another aspect of his daily life. Marlowe went up on the roof with a tumbler of Old Forester Prohibition style 115 proof bourbon and a package of unfiltered Camels. He didn't drink or smoke very often, but when he did, he wanted real liquor and a real cigarette. The atmosphere wasn't exactly pleasant. The air was warm and dirty. Saturday night traffic endless in both directions. In this Hollywood, there was no romance, no night filled with possibilities. No one was tapped for stardom, and life was not an adventure. This Hollywood was workaday and ordinary and a grind. That's me trying to bring the original Marlowe's cynicism forward.
Yeah.
And to make that part of his interior dialogue.
He had that kind of wounded romanticism, you know, Chandler.
Yes.
Did. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That was the tarnished night, you know, that whole kind of thing.
And he had these very dim views, and at the same time, he was relentless about getting justice.
Yeah.
You know, it was a great combination of characteristics, and Chandler did that for me.
Well, he was a great travel guide into the sort of the hoity-toity, pretentious enclaves, you know, of the uber rich, and we get that vibe when Marlowe, your Marlowe himself, first goes to Kendra's home, you know, and you give us some really neat little observations about contemporary LA, you know, that the uber wealthy are trying to keep their beachfront properties private so no one can enjoy the beach, you know, that kind of
it's a very real thing, and it goes on today. But Chandler did these things with his stories where they were glamorous in that way, in Hollywood way, and then they were seedy.
Yeah.
You know, he had these two poles, not opposite, but just poles, and so that was another thing that was a consideration in writing the story, that I wanted that different aspects of LA. So there were all these considerations that were going into the story. And again, I'm doing this as I go along. And I wouldn't advise that method to anybody, because I write 60 pages, I look back on the 60 pages, and I think of all the things that I missed, all the things that I should have put in that 60 pages, or that, you know, something doesn't track. So then I have to go back and rewrite the 60 pages before I can go on to page 61. And I'm constantly doing this up and back, up and back, up and back. And so it's incredibly inefficient. And I throw away 5 times as many pages as I keep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, again, we don't want to give away too many spoilers here, but by the same token, a Chandler novel is often, you know, a very simple plot device. You know, he wasn't as interested in plot, famously.
No.
You know, he was all about character and atmosphere, and all that kind of stuff. You know, and you think of something like The Little Sister, or, you know, it's basically my sister's gone missing, go find her. It's the missing person plot, which,
Yes.
which you employ here too. He's got two different stories. And I wanted to ask you briefly, because this character, Ren Stewart, who is part of the second plot, which I'll have you outline briefly. I think she might be my favorite character in the book.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know why. Well, I thought that the dialogue between Marlowe and Ren was very much reminded me of some of that, emotionally fraught dialogue. There's fireworks underneath the lines. And so tell us about her on that side.
I had to come up with a Lauren Bacall character.
Right.
A femme fatale, but in this day and age, not a femme fatale, but a really admirable, sincere, loving person. And there was still this attraction underneath. But she's from the UK. She's come to America because her ex-husband has kidnapped her 7-year-old son, and she's desperately trying to find her kid in this vast LA. And she's referred to Marlowe because she thinks his fees will be lower. They aren't, they're astronomical. But he says, we'll settle the fee thing later, because he's very much interested in her.
Yep.
And it's another, it's another subplot where Marlowe has to try and find this kid. And at the same time, he's dealing with Cody and Emmett and all these other things. And that's something that I do, this with a complicated plot. Hopefully it's complex and not complicated. But she's an admirable person, and she's tough and she's relentless. And by the same token, she won't be pushed around, and she's not impressed with Cody, or Kendra for that matter. And I wanted him to have a love interest, but that's just out of reach. It's
don't say
Chandler now, no, but it's to have some true romance in a Chandler book just wouldn't fly.
It wouldn't last very long. Yeah. Because part of the thing about him that I think you do with your Philip Marlowe is we're always reminded that Chandler's Philip Marlowe was forever an outsider.
Yes.
He was a loner. I said that wounded romantic thing. And your Philip Marlowe is also an outsider. We get the sense that he's always standing off to the side, immaculately dressed, which I thought was a great nod. He's always very sharply put together.
Yes.
But he's an outsider. He's he's viewing the world from a different vantage point. And I thought that the two characters in both of his jobs, Kendra and Ren, were interesting counterpoints, because I love this description. You make a point of telling us early on, and this reminded me a little bit of IQ too, because there's that whole riff in IQ, especially the early one, the book 1 and 2, where he's not impressed by wealth. Those things don't interest him. He's not impressed by all of that. And when Philip Marlowe meets this woman, of course, she's used to men just falling all over her and being impressed.
Yes.
And that doesn't impress him. And frankly, it turns him off. And then he meets Ren, and he asks, may I ask what you do for a living? I love this. She says, I teach literature at West London University, but I like to call myself a writer. She said it flatly, not embarrassed. I love this. My novels are abstruse and convoluted. I have a very small following, which never seems to grow. The most success I've had is with a book of children's poems called Ertl the Turtle. It hasn't done well. Marlowe was impressed. Most people would offer a more encouraging assessment of themselves. Ren was direct and unflinching, eliminating one of the most exasperating things about clients. They lie. which I thought was wonderful insight into that character. And
Thank you.
yeah,
These, it's in this kind of book, you can't really take your time establishing characters. You want pace, and you want to get going. Let's go. And so I had to establish Ren right away. She comes into his office, and from that alone, you get a sense of who she is and what she's like, and a better sense of Marlowe, that he's impressed with her because she doesn't try to impress him.
right.
And so it's always, whatever they do, whatever I write, in a way, it's always about character.
Yeah.
And that scene was about the both of them.
Right. Let's see here. What else can we really say about the book without giving it away too much? Just trying to think. Well, we talked a little bit about how he takes the reader through all these different various ethnic enclaves and communities in Los Angeles, which is one of the great things that Chandler did as well, and what you do in your IQ novels as well. Can you compare? I don't know, it's apples and oranges, I'm sure, but compare how you would approach a Philip Marlowe novel to an IQ novel. Is it the same basic vibe or approach, rather?
My mindset when I started Marlowe was, this is not as dark as IQ.
Okay.
There are dark sequences in the book for sure, but the IQ novels are grittier, and there's not really a sense of fun that runs through them, like hopefully it does with Marlowe. I wanted a romp in between all the other stuff that's happening and all the bad guys and all the action and all that other stuff. I wanted some fun in the book, and to have fun with these characters. Yeah. My favorite character to write was Emmett. He's a cranky old man, and he's absolutely old school. Cody ends up staying with Emmett to keep her safe from all these bad guys. And he absolutely does have no idea what to do with a 17-year-old girl, especially this girl. And in this scene, he's trying to make contact with her. Just, make contact. Cody was in the kitchen messing with her phone. "What are you doing?" Emmett asked. "Twitter," she said. "I'm going to take a wild guess and say that you have no social media. I can't imagine what you post." "You know what I wouldn't post?" Emmett said. He took a moment to organize his thoughts. "First of all, cats. Fucking cats. What makes these people think anybody wants to see one more photo of Fuzzy coughing up a hairball or licking its own patootie? Everybody's seen that crap a million times. At some point in their lives, everybody's owned a goddamn cat. I really don't get these people. I mean, what are they thinking? That their cat is special? Oh, really? Special how? The cat plays softball? The cat shits in the toilet? The cat has a graduate degree from the University of Meow Mix? I got news for these folks. Nobody's paying attention to your ordinary, common as weeds kitty cat, whether it's making its own litter box or dancing the cha-cha-cha. That stuff is fun to write.
Yeah.
That stuff is fun to write. Where you get a guy who's just so not PC, and just let him loose. And, this kind of thing is very fun for me, and I hope fun for the readers. But again, it's also character.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, am I wrong? Would I be wrong in saying that, while Philip Marlowe is certainly the protagonist, on some level, the investigation is a collaborative effort with his father. His father helps. He provides resources that Philip doesn't have.
Yes.
Yeah. So that brings another unique layer to it.
And they have these longstanding issues, so it's not exactly smooth sailing. And somebody told me, but I think it's true, that there is a dysfunctional child-parent relationship in all of my books. And it might have something to do with my own dysfunctional family, I'm not sure. But my head automatically goes there. When I thought about having a counterpoint to Marlowe, my immediate thought was father.
Hmm.
You know, and it did a lot of things. Did a lot of things for me to have the layers of different views and different eras, and as well as his issues. And but that's what I automatically went when I was thinking of a sidekick. If that's basically what he is, and I wanted conflict, my head immediately went to father.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It could have gone to a mother, which would have been a different dynamic, right?
Would have been a different dynamic.
Yeah. Well, what do you have going on next? Are you going to continue with Marlowe, or are you going to do an IQ novel next?
I don't know about Marlowe. I want to write another one, but it's complicated. You know, all these agreements have to be made between the estate and the publisher, and they have to agree on whether or not they want to do this, because in the end the estate makes a decision.
Sure.
And then the publisher has to figure out, well, can we make money doing this? And
yeah,
so there's all kinds of things that have to happen before I write another Marlowe. But I would really like to, and they know that. I'm working on IQ6 now.
all right.
And at the end of 5, at the end of Smoke, Isaiah's true love is kidnapped by a character from the past, a hitman named Skip. And in IQ6, we pick that up right there. Marlowe is in the hospital, and he hears about this kidnapping. He gets up, throws on his clothes, and he's off to LA and to find his girlfriend. And he and Skip play cat and mouse. It's in a lot of ways, the story is more straight line, more pure than other stories that I've written, because that's the through line. He's got to find Grace, you know, and so we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I don't know what I'm gonna write till I write it, and you know, so far, you know, I'm happy, but I'm a third of the way through the book.
Okay.
And
when do you have to turn it in?
they're not going to publish IQ6 until the spring of next year.
Okay.
So I have time.
Fall or something.
Yeah.
Summer.
And
yeah.
I can take my time.
Do you have a tentative title yet, or does that always come last?
A tentative title, oddly enough, is Fix It.
Is what?
Fix It. F-I-X-I-T.
Okay.
In the previous book, in Smoke, Dodson says, you know what? I could be a fixer with all of his hustling skills. And so that's the subplot in IQ6.
Cool.
Is he's a fixer, and he has cases where he helps to fix things for people. And it's the lighter story through the book. And I love writing Dodson. I just love it.
Yeah.
Oh, it brings the two of them back together again, which I wanted to do. That pairing of Isaiah and Dodson, because they've been apart for a while. So I get to bring them back as Batman and Robin in the new book.
I got to ask you, has Margaret Cho been made aware of her cameo in your books? She must have.
No,
Really?
not that I know of. I haven't heard anything about it.
Don't you have people that can get a book to her now?
I probably could. You know, I might just do that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
You could have her make another walk-on somewhere.
I love that. She's such a character.
Yeah. Well, have you, I mean, there's the obligatory question we can't avoid about TV and movies. And I got to think, you know, IQ, of course, would make a wonderful TV show if it was done right.
Yes.
As would your new interpretation of Marlowe. Have there been any bites?
Marlowe belongs, the character Marlowe belongs to the estate. So they will decide who gets to make a TV show.
Of course. Yeah, that's right.
Again, it gets complicated.
Sure.
IQ, you know, I sold IQ in 2015. And I still don't have a show. They still don't have a show.
Mm,
It's one of those Hollywood stories about things in development, and then the studio head gets fired, or they don't like the pilot, or they can't agree on budget, and it's been going on like that since then. And we almost had a deal with HBO Max, but they fell out over money and who was going to actually produce the movie. They're falling out over these things, and so I don't know. I really don't know. They have a pilot written for TV that I liked, and then since they couldn't agree on TV, the producer Alcon, which is basically a finance company, they said, "Well, we'll make 4 movies. You know, we can finance themselves, so we don't have to ask a studio." But I haven't heard anything about that, and so I just have to let it go. I can't
yeah,
think about that. You know,
it's got to be crazy
can't- I-
making after a while.
yeah, I can't wait for the phone to ring like I did when I was a screenwriter. You know, I have a good job now, so I can just hang with that.
Right. That's cool. Let's see. Well, if anybody's watching and you have questions, go ahead and send them in. I've been kind of looking out for them. Let's see here. What do we have? Oh, this isn't a question, but Brett says, "I love your books." And he says, "I briefly met Steve McQueen shortly before his death." Where are we? "He visited my film directing class with Tom Grease." I think that's right. "Steve was gracious, but of course we were film students and fans." That's cool. Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You know, McQueen, if I had a choice, is who I'd cast for Marlowe. You know, he has that sort of quiet intensity,
Yeah.
and he may not say much, but you know he's in the room. You know, Marlowe's that kind of guy.
Right. You know, it's funny. What is your favorite film version of Chandler? Are you a Bogey fan or?
Robert Altman's movie. I forget which book it was. Is it Long Goodbye or Farewell, My Lovely? I don't know. But what Robert Altman made a movie, a Marlowe movie with Elliot Gould.
Right.
Yes, and it seems like really weird casting, and it doesn't really have anything to do with Marlowe or Chandler. But it's a really, if you like Robert Altman, you're going to like this movie.
I think it's The Long Goodbye, isn't it? And it's set in like late 60s, early 70s California. Is that right?
Yeah,
Someone
I think it's UK. I think it's in England.
is it really?
No, I'm thinking of another movie. I'm thinking of Michael Winner's movie. And that was terrible. But anyway, I like the Altman movie. I think that's great. And you know, the early movies,
Yeah.
early Humphrey Bogart movies they're just amazing.
Right. I think, you know, it's funny. I think my favorite, if you've ever seen it, there was a movie that was made in the mid 70s. I think it was like 74, 75. And it was a version of Farewell, My Lovely, starring Robert Mitchum as Marlowe.
Yes.
And fantastic cast, you know, Charlotte Rampling, who just sizzled on the screen, as she always does, Harry Dean Stanton. But, you know, Mitchum was getting up there in age at this point, and he just embodied that kind of end of the road Marlowe, you know, that sort of washed up, things haven't turned out the way he wanted to. You know, he's in some crappy SRO somewhere.
Right.
Very great movie. Yeah.
You know, I compare Ren in the book with Charlotte Rampling.
Yeah.
That was that was one of the things I took from that movie. I'm always impressed with her. I think she's a terrific actress. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Such presence in those eyes. Jesus.
And I wanted that aristocratic look, a very angular, you know, and yet British face. So
we've got a couple of questions that have come in, which is great. Let's see here. Betty says, when you start a new book, are you looking for a film or TV version of the book, and how may that affect your writing or plot?
I don't. I don't. I'm writing the book, and I'm within those confines. And writing a TV show is a whole different animal. And so I have to stay focused on the book and not think about, well, I'm going to do this because it will look great on screen. I can't do that. It's too distracting.
But you probably are a visual writer. You're aware of what things,
Yes, I see the scenes in my head, because when I'm writing, I'm in the scene. I'm the guy driving the getaway car. And because I'm driving the getaway car, I can see what the options are. Turn
Right.
left, turn right. And so I do write visually. And I think, well, one of the books I read, it's a better experience for me to be able to visualize, exactly what's happening.
Yeah. And the best thing is with minimal description, which is great. You can describe a character in broad strokes and let the reader fill in everything, which I think is a great skill. I know we've talked about this a little bit before. We've got a little bit of time left, but I wanted to, maybe for the viewers who weren't familiar with your story, tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and what's the portrait of the artist as the young man?
As a young man, I grew up in South Central LA, in an area that was full of crime and gangs, all the inherent problems of the hood. As an experience, it wasn't any different than what millions of kids go through every day. My grandparents, they lived in the area because it was close to Little Tokyo. My family lived with them because we were just getting by. My grandparents, they were very old world. My grandparents hardly spoke English. It was stern and formal, and my grandfather, they were both very traditional. My grandfather collected samurai swords, and my grandmother was a calligrapher, and she wore these beautiful kimonos around the house. And they treated me like somebody else's cat. Like they couldn't actually kill me, but they didn't have to be nice to me either. Me and my brothers, we'd adapted to the neighborhood. Most of our friends were Black, so we co-opted their speech, style, attitudes, all that stuff, which made for a kind of culture clash, generational clash within my family. And because my parents wanted to be Brady Bunch mainstream, so you have these three different generations, all with different viewpoints and different aspirations, and it was made sort of more intense because my grandparents and my parents wanted me and my rowdy brothers to have some connection to our own cultural heritage, which never really went the way they'd hoped. My parents made me take a ceramics class in Little Tokyo, taught by a very famous artist. He was from Japan, a friend of my grandfather's. I get there, there's 8 or 10 of these obsessively clean-cut suburban Japanese kids. And I'm looking around going, now, I got a toothpick in my mouth. I'm wearing my Ray-Bans indoors, and it's just, I'm not staying in this class. So my strategy was, everything I made was somehow failing. It wasn't obvious, but it wasn't, it wasn't subtle either. It'd be like an ordinary teapot, but you wouldn't necessarily want to pick it up by the handle. My brother, he got kicked out of a Japanese Boy Scout troop for buying his merit badges. He didn't really get the whole Boy Scout thing.
Is this in the 60s or?
Yeah, 70s.
70s.
And so throughout that time, it was culturally all over the place. And throughout at that time, I really felt like I was a misfit. Wasn't Black, wasn't white, wasn't Japanese. I think that's why I was drawn to the original Sherlock Holmes. Here's a guy like me, misfit, doesn't belong, not a badass. But unlike me, Sherlock had an identity. He was confident, and he could face his world and not be afraid. That was very meaningful to me as a small kid in a big neighborhood. And when it got time to write IQ, all those elements kind of came together by themselves, and Sherlock in the Hood was born. That was my only idea. That was it.
That's great. So when did your parent or your grandparents were the generation that came over from Japan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When did they land in Los Angeles?
They landed, my grandfather landed in the 20s.
Okay.
And there was famine in Japan. And so he came over on a freighter to Vancouver. And then he worked his way down the coast, picking crops. And he made it to LA, which he had some relatives there. And he married my grandmother. He found her in this, she was a mail order bride. And there were these catalogs of little sepia pictures of women, and it had a little description of what they could do. Plays the koto, can sew, can sing. And my grandmother just picked somebody out of there. She arrived on a freighter, my grandmother, and they got married the next day.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how did they, so your parents would have been born before the war or right around the war?
They were born
30s.
Yeah.
How did the family do during the war years? Was it, did
they all went to camp? Yeah,
Excuse me?
went to camp. They all went to an internment camp. Yeah. Yeah, it was a hard time.
Yeah.
A very hard time.
Yeah.
They lost everything. My grandfather had 2 hardware stores in Little Tokyo. He lost those. He had to throw squatters out of his house to live in it. And it was a really hard time, hard time for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a dark spot on our country's history for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Do you think anything like that would be fair game for fiction? Or for you at some point?
I doubt it.
Doubt it.
I doubt it. It's not what I do.
Yeah.
You know, a novel like that would take a lot of research and a lot of immersion into that time. I don't really like research.
Have you ever read Naomi Hirahara's wonderful
Yes, her book.
Masarai?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic writer. I really like what she does.
She is. She is.
Well, that's interesting. I'm glad I asked you that question. It's good to hear a little bit more. Let's see. Well, hey, Betty's on the same page as me. She says your family background would make a terrific novel. Would you consider that? You know what?
I might use them. I might use them. I might use the family. It wouldn't be about them, but I can see myself writing a novel about a kid who grows up the way I grew up. I can see myself doing that.
Right. Or, following a case that harkens back to an earlier era. That's always really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Joe, it's always a treat to see you, and hopefully we'll see you back here in person, and Barbara and I will take you out to some spendy restaurant.
I really miss that.
Yeah.
I really miss that.
Yeah. Well, folks, here we go. Here's the brand new book, The Goodbye Coast. Beautiful. Joe, as I say, Joe signed a bunch of them for us. So grab one before they disappear. And again, Joe, great to talk with you as always. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. We'll see you soon.